And let's take up Representative Agello's Bill 5704. Vice Chairwoman Agello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 5704 is introduced with common cause and with the support of the Secretary of State's Office of Elections and the Board of Elections. This would authorize the Board of Elections to conduct risk-limiting post-election audits of our ballots. Risk-limiting post-election audits are possible because we vote on paper ballots. Those ballots are counted by machines, and the risk-limiting audit would test the machines to make sure that they are counting and reporting accurately. The risk-limiting audits are testing very small percentages of a precinct or other area of collected ballots, and then looking at that small sample and comparing it to the reported total. If there's a big discrepancy, they will count manually more of those paper ballots, continuing until they are sure that we have an accurate count. Mr. Marion from Common Cause has been working on this legislation, patterning it after other states which have adopted this, and I will leave it to him to explain better.
Very good. Could we hear from John Marion and Jason Martesian from the Secretary of State's office?
Okay. Thank you very much, Chairman Keeble, remaining members of the committee, Representative Agello for sponsoring this again. I've also provided written testimony I hope you'll refer to during my remarks. I'm going to try to be brief, but this is somewhat technical. I still think I can do it fairly briefly. As Representative Agello said, we vote on paper in Rhode Island. There is a reason we vote on paper, because Jim Langevin, when he was our Secretary of State in 1998, decided we should vote on paper, and he convinced the legislature to give money to buy machines that would allow us to vote on paper. He had a lot of foresight in doing this because in 2000 we saw a very flawed voting system in Florida, the infamous hanging chad, really teach us about the value of voting on paper, but voting in the way we do, by marking a ballot, not by punching a ballot. Many states since 2000 have gone back to vote. First they went to all electronic systems, and then they realized the value of doing it the way Rhode Island does on paper. Why is paper important? Because it provides a verifiable record of how the voter cast their vote. And the key term there is verifiable. Prior to elections, and Representative Corvese was asking about this on the other bill, prior to elections they have to put computer code into the machine at your polling place, right? It's done at the Board of Elections, but there's computer code like there is in our phones and our many other electronic equipment, and they put the code depending on the precinct, and then they test those machines by using what they call a test deck of sample ballots that are marked, and they see if the machine reports the correct result based on those markings. And that is all done, and when it's finished, the Board of Elections votes to certify those machines that they're ready for the election. So we do testing and certification on the front end. What we don't do is anything to make sure the machines perform correctly on the back end after Election Day. This bill would create a system, or would require the Board of Elections to create a system to test on the back end. And Representative Agello, I think, did a great job of describing that. It would require them to take a sample of ballots selected randomly, and that sample size would vary by how close the race was that they're sampling and how many votes were cast, among other variables. And then they would compare those ballots to what the machine reports that those ballots said. So our machines can produce what's called a cast vote record. So they can say that a ballot had a vote for this person for president and this person for state representative and this yes or no on question 1. And they can compare that to the actual ballot. And if they find a discrepancy, then the formula under a risk limiting audit says, go find more ballots. And if the discrepancy persists, it would lead ultimately to a full recount of the election. And those results from the recount would be used to certify the results. I'm going to give an example of why we need this. And this is in the written testimony I provided in your packet. In North Kingstown, in November, they used one ballot type to test and certify the machine, and they used a different ballot type accidentally at the polling place. And it had to do with a local ballot question, question 9, which was about a revolving fund for septic replacement. And the test deck gave the options for the voter as approve or reject. And there's a blow up of this in your in my testimony. The actual ballot wasn't accept or reject; it was yes or no. And as a result, the mark wasn't in the right place. And when the scanner went to look for it, it was looking in the wrong place. And so on election night, the results were 8,471 no's to 5 yeses. And so folks decided that this...
We all dream of elections like that.
Well, no. I mean, if you're a yes, you don't dream of that. So this is illustrated in here. The result was so unusual that it was caught. And the ballots were refed with the correct programming in it. And the result was 4,569 no's to 9,492 yeses. So more people actually voted than the initial tally showed, and the result was different. We caught that in Rhode Island because eagle-eyed election officials knew the result seemed odd. What if that result had been close? The mistake might have stood, and the wrong outcome from that election might have been certified. Post-election audits are there to catch those mistakes, and ultimately not just to catch them, to rectify them. And so this bill would ultimately lead to the correct result being found for the election and certified. I'm happy, there's a lot of technical information I'm happy to provide about this. I just want to mention a couple of things. 29 states have a form of post-election audits. 4 additional states authorize it in certain circumstances. This particular type of audit, this risk limiting audit, is not what they do in those 29 states. They do what's called a flat percent audit. 1% of all ballots, 5% of all ballots, choose your number. Different states do different numbers. Risk limiting audits would require less work, fewer ballots to be examined, and it would maximize the probability that you're going to find an incorrect result. That's why we're proposing this type of audit. Colorado is currently implementing risk limiting audits. They've been tried in California, in Ohio, and there are proposals in those states to make them permanent. We understand this particular type of audit might be difficult to adopt at first go around, so we're happy to amend this, working with the Board of Elections. As long as we have an audit process in place and we move toward risk limiting, we are happy with that. As Representative Agello mentioned, the Board of Elections supports this. They voted unanimously at their February meeting to support it. You'll hear from the Secretary of State. The governor has submitted a letter. So folks who are involved in elections in the state support this. And we think this is really the last key piece to modernizing in securing our elections. Because we can do all we want to get people registered to vote, to have them vote, whether it's early or not. But if those votes aren't being counted correctly, then we've really disenfranchised the voter. So I'm happy to answer questions. I see there are questions for me.
Yes, Representative Corvese.
So right now, there's no post-election audit of any kind.
There is a lot of work, as folks can tell you, that happens after an election. There is a big reconciliation, accounting for all the ballots and the ballot apps from the poll book. But there's nothing that's done to assess the accuracy of the machine count.
So is this risk audit process to check the efficacy of the ballot counting machine, or is it to be used to determine the true winner or loser of a contest?
It's to check the machine, but if it discovers that there's a problem with the machine, it would ultimately determine, and that's a great way to put it, it would determine the true winner.
Would a risk audit be the end point for determining the winner of a contest?
Well, as the legislation is written, if the audit found a discrepancy and the sample was increased and it persisted to the point where the sample became the entire election, then the results of that examination would be what the Board of Elections would have to use to certify the election.
As opposed to a full count?
As opposed to what the machine said, which was inaccurate.
Not what the machine count is, but a manual count of all the votes.
Yes. So
it would preclude a manual count of all the votes?
No, it would require a manual count of all the votes.
If there was a discrepancy found in the risk audit.
And the discrepancy persisted.
If the discrepancy persisted. What if the discrepancy did not persist? Would there still be a way of having a manual audit?
No. So currently,
Why?
Rhode Island law does not allow a manual tally of ballots. The Rhode Island law...
It's within what percent?
No, a recount in Rhode Island is not a manual tally of ballots. It is a refeed of the ballots into a tabulator.
A total refeed.
It is a refeed. I believe Mr. Raposa can confirm that.
My concern is when we're talking about the electoral process, which is sacrosanct, when we're talking about transparency, we talk about how important the integrity of the electoral process is. I get a little nervous when the end point is somehow dependent upon or a function of a formula of a small group. Because that's what you're taking with this risk audit.
The initial sample is a result of the formula, and it is small, a number of ballots. If it doesn't find a discrepancy, then the machine total stands. That is used to certify the result of the election. If it finds a discrepancy, so if it finds a difference in how the machine counted the ballot versus how the human being who was examining the ballot counted it, then the formula dictates that you pull more ballots and examine them. If the discrepancy doesn't persist, if the machine and the human agree, then the machine wins. If the discrepancy continues to persist, you keep seeing problems with the machine, then ultimately the entire set of ballots for that race is examined by hand, and that hand count is used
as opposed to a refeed.
As opposed to a refeed, because the machine, at that point, the code in the machine is inaccurate.
Where would the recount be held? State Board of Elections?
So this legislation gives the Board of Elections the ability to determine the process under which this is done. It could be done by the cities and towns, or it could all be done at the state board. If it's done at the cities and towns, it's done at the direction of the state board under rules and regulations they promulgate. So, for instance, you could imagine if we did an audit of the governor's race, and the formula said we needed to pull some ballots from North Providence, from Warwick, and Pawtucket, and the average number of ballots that's actually taken under this formula is 14. That's like the median. I know I'm mixing average and median there. Number of ballots. 14 ballots are pulled in North Providence. They're compared to what the machine said. If there's no discrepancy, fine, the audit has succeeded there, and same with the other communities. If a discrepancy occurs, then it's expanded. And we actually I brought an expert. There's a computer scientist from Brown University who's an expert in the statistics of this, and I think she could probably do a little better justice to the sampling question that we're going over.
Why do you feel this is necessary in the first place?
Because right now, either by a sin of commission or a sin of omission, something could go wrong with the machine. It could never be detected, and the wrong outcome for the election could be certified. So take this North Kingstown example I gave. Had that outcome been a close outcome, that incorrect outcome might have been certified. And it was an administrative error in using two different ballot styles. A single ballot style should have been used to test the machines and used on election day, but instead two ballot styles were used. So this is necessary because right now we're putting complete faith in the machine. All our faith is in the computer code in the machine. The computer code is proprietary. It belongs to ES&S of Omaha, Nebraska. I can't examine it. I can't do a public records request for it and see if there are any bugs in there. I can't give it to a computer scientist and ask him to see if there are any bugs in there.
Who would perform the risk audit?
Who
would perform the risk audit?
So it would be done either by the Board of Elections or by the local boards of canvassers or a combination thereof. And it's done in a public process. It can be observed in the same way a recount can be observed today.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you for your questions. Those are great questions.
Any other questions for John? Yes, Representative Coughlin.
Very brief. John, the formula you're talking about, the sampling formula, I'm not going to ask people to sit through a whole dissertation tonight. I'm sure your expert can provide it. Is that formula published somewhere? Can we get access to it?
Yeah, so it's on this. Risk limiting audits were developed by several academics. One of them, his name is Philip Stark. He's the chair of the statistics department at UC Berkeley. He maintains a website that has the formula on it, and it has a calculator, much like you see like mortgage interest calculators you can use online. It's just like that, and you can punch in how many ballots there were in the race, what the margin was, how many precincts there were, and it will spit out how many ballots you have to examine. So
Will it print out can we see the underlying mathematics that makes this?
Yes, you can see the underlying mathematics. And if you want, I can get Professor Stark to write a letter to the committee. He's an evangelist for this, and is more than happy to provide background material.
Yeah, I'd like to see the underlying math. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for John? Any other questions for John? Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John stated all of the information I would have stated. I know he's got a couple of experts. Just like to thank Representative Agello and Common Cause for bringing this forward. The Secretary, when we procured new equipment with the Board of Elections, heard loudly and clearly from the General Assembly about the importance of paper ballots, including a conversation with Representative Filippi, which I remember well. We believe that, as John mentioned, this risk-limiting audits, or just post-election audits in general, will go a long way towards ensuring that our Rhode Island voters have confidence in the integrity of the elections and integrity of the elections outcomes. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the Secretary of State's office? Mr. Marion, you said you have some experts here. Who would that be?
So Tony Adams, or just making sure they're still here. You signed up to testify? Yep.
Mr. Adams, come on up.
I'm going to butcher her last name, Professor Anna Lisenska.
I actually knew I was going to butcher it. That's
Yeah,
why
so
I
you
made
made
you
me
say
do
it.
it.
So
So
I don't think they were going anywhere. The professor's very animated back there. She's
worried that
yeah.
happened before this night is over.
Professor.
Oh, hi. So my name is Anna Lisanska. I'm a professor of computer science at Brown University. I received my PhD from MIT in 2002, and my area of expertise is computer and information security. The risk-limiting election audit bill is necessary to answer Representative Corvez's question. It's not here, unfortunately. As a computer scientist, I can say that any electronic equipment, any computer program can potentially work incorrectly. This applies to the smartphone in your pocket as well as to the election tabulating equipment in your election precinct. These errors can be the result of a programming error or a hardware malfunction or a miscommunication between the persons who program the equipment and their client, in this case, an election board. As a computer security researcher, I must also stress that increasingly often errors may also be caused by malicious hackers, not yet in equipment used for voting in the U.S., but already in many other contexts. Election equipment may well be the next frontier in state-sponsored hacking by Russia and others. In a risk-limiting audit, you take a random sample of cast ballots and check whether the results they give are statistically consistent with the election tally provided by the tabulating equipment. It is the best way to make sure that errors in equipment, whether inadvertent or malicious, do not lead to a breakdown in democracy. This approach has broad support in the computer science and mathematics academic community. It is less onerous than auditing a fixed percentage of the ballots, as is currently mandated in other states, and just as reliable. I'm very excited about Rhode Island leading the way on risk-limiting election audits, and I'm also really excited that my Representative Agello, is the one who sponsored this bill. So now to address a little bit of the statistics. Is it too late in the evening for that? So it's fairly easy to understand. So if you have, so let's say that you have a yes/no question, right? And the machine says that you got 70% yes and 30% no. So now, let's say you take 10 ballots, you pick them completely at random. You expect that 7 will be yes and 3 will be no. Now, it could be, you won't be too surprised if you see 6 yeses and 4 nos. That's still, you can live with that. That's really not such a big discrepancy. But if you're seeing something that's way off, then you're like, well, something's weird. And it could be because you just happened by chance to pick the ballots that don't happen to actually correlate with the overall result. Or maybe the tally that the machine pronounced was wrong. So then you say, all right, let's sample 10 more. Now we have 20 completely randomly chosen ballots. Do they correlate? Are they statistically consistent with the tally given by the machine? Oh, now they are. Okay, so we're done. Or let's say they're not. Then you keep going. Eventually, either you get your random sample tallying consistently, statistically, with what the machine told you, or you have manually recounted the entire set of ballots, and now you've discovered the true tally by hand. So that's basically the idea. So that formula that is available from Philip Stark's website, it tells you the size of the initial sample. So as John said, it starts small with like 14 is most cases is good enough, and then it tells you when to keep whether to keep going or to stop and pronounce the machine okay, depending on what confidence you desire from your election. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Any questions for Professor? Thank you very much for being here today. We appreciate it. Mr. Adams.
Good evening. I want to applaud all of you for your stamina. It's amazing. I don't know if it's typical that you get 17 bills in a night, but thank you for your patience. So my name is Tony Adams, and I'm a Rhode Island resident. I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force, and currently an information security professional at a local security company called SecureWorks. And recently I've gotten more actively involved in our democracy. I was a poll worker last year in both the primary and the general election. I did that to gain a more holistic understanding of how our election systems are administered and operated. Through a public access records request, I learned more about the system that was purchased by the state and did an in-depth analysis of the software, the hardware, and the vendor. And have hats off to the Secretary of State's office for purchasing a system from a solid vendor, a leader in the market space, and also one that employs paper ballots. It's essential to have that voter verifiable record to be able to offer the opportunity to conduct post-election audits. I recently got engaged with the Election Verification Network, which is a collection of experts of various backgrounds from around the country. They approach election security and integrity with expertise in mathematics, academia, their Secretary of State's representatives, election officials. So in that conference last week in Washington, D.C., a recurring theme was cybersecurity and also risk-limiting audits. So from my background, I come at it partly from a cybersecurity perspective and can say that any system that has code is imperfect. There is a non-zero chance that at some point it might be misconfigured, it might fail, it might be unpatched, or it might be misconfigured. So in the practice of information security, you apply a variety of controls to mitigate the risk that the intended outcome of that system is not incorrect. So the vendor and the Board of Elections, I'm sure that they stay on top of the security of their systems, but ultimately, as was witnessed last November, you could experience a human error, a configuration error that results in the unintended outcome. The intent of the voters is not accurately represented in the results. So I'm here in support of risk-limiting audits because it's an additional software-independent approach for increasing confidence in the system and confidence in the results of an election.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Adams. Any questions? Thank you both for being here. Jane Costa from the League of Women Voters signed up in support. Randall Rose, Noreen Duncan signed up in support. Susan Escherick from the League of Women Voters signed up in support. Steve Brown from the ACLU is here. And Patrick Laverty. Patrick had signed up in support. Mr. Rose?
Thank you. Well, I'll just get to the essentials here. The essential thing about this bill is that it allows the paper ballots to be checked so that we don't, in some cases, so that we don't have to rely entirely on what the machines say, because the machines can be bugged, or perhaps more likely, machines can be hacked. I think it's long overdue that we have some program established to institutionalize the process of checking paper ballots in case the machine results are inaccurate for one of those reasons. So that's what this bill does. And not to get too much into the statistical techniques, but the thing about what this bill does is it looks at a sample of the paper ballots to see if the sample gives confidence that the machine result is reliable. But it will never overturn the machine result just based on a sample. If the sample doesn't give enough confidence, if they look at the sample and the statistics don't allow you to have enough confidence that the machine result is reliable, then it makes a larger sample. If a larger sample, you check a larger sample of paper ballots, and these paper ballots are checked in public by the State Board of Elections and the local Board of Canvassers. So you start with a small sample, and then you go to a larger sample, and then maybe to a larger sample. And at each stage, you're seeing if there's enough statistical evidence to believe that the machine result is reliable. But if none of these samples, not the small ones and not the large ones, if none of these small or large samples give you enough statistical confidence that the machine result is reliable, then you count all the ballots by hand. What it does is it makes several attempts to get statistical confidence that the machine result is reliable by checking only a relatively small number of ballots, and hopefully that's if the machine is accurate, then you won't have to check very many ballots by hand in order to get enough confidence. But if checking the sample doesn't give you enough confidence, and checking even a larger sample doesn't give you enough confidence, then you go to a full hand recount, which is done in public by the State Board of Elections and the Board of Canvassers. And in advance, the State Board of Elections and the local Board of Canvassers have procedures for deciding which election contests are checked in this way. Not all election contests are checked in this way. I think this is a good bill. I would like this program to be used on a large scale. I'd like if it was used for a large fraction of the contest. I don't know how large a fraction of the contest it will be used for, but I still think it's a very good thing because it gives us some chance of catching if there's an attempt to hack into the election by who knows what malicious actor. So I hope you support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Randall. Mr. Brown?
Thank you. The ACLU also supports this legislation. I just want to make one general point. I really don't have any expertise on the specifics, but the general point is that these machines are fallible. And you actually have a representative in this General Assembly who proves it as best as anybody else. The representative lost by 1 vote in the 2012 election. There was an election vote count and then 3 machine recounts, and there were 4 different votes. So we encourage some mechanism in place to ensure that there are audits because the problems can exist with these machines. Thank you.